All right, today we're diving into one of the most epic and influential stories ever told, the ancient book of Exodus. So, let's just start with the central question Exodus tries to answer, because it's a huge one. How does a group of powerless, enslaved people stuck at the bottom of the world's greatest superpower somehow become a nation that literally changes the course of history? That's the journey we're going to trace. And to wrap our heads around this massive story, we're going to break it down into three main acts. This is our roadmap, so to speak. First, we have deliverance, getting out of slavery. Second, there's relationship, figuring out who they are now. And finally, the ultimate goal, presence, God actually living among them. Okay, so let's jump into part one, from slavery to freedom. The story kicks off with the Israelites in Egypt. And, they aren't just visiting. They're slaves, suffering under this incredibly harsh Pharaoh. They cry out for rescue, and that's when things really start to happen. You can just feel the tension build here. It starts with God calling a pretty unlikely hero, Moses, from a burning bush that isn't actually burning up. This sets up a major showdown. 10 plagues hit Egypt, and each one is basically a direct shot at one of Egypt's gods. The whole thing comes to a head with the Passover, where a final terrible plague passes over at the Israelite homes. And that leads to the big finale, the escape through the Red Sea. They walk through on dry ground, and just as the army follows, the walls of water crash down on them. And this line right here, spoken when they are totally trapped between the sea and the army, really gets to the heart of this whole first act. The point isn't how clever or strong the Israelites are. The point is that God himself is their rescuer. He's the one fighting for them. So they're free. Great. But now what? I mean, they're no longer Egyptian slaves, so who are they? This is what part two is all about. Moving from freedom to a covenant. It's about getting a whole new identity. And to get this next part, you have to understand this word, covenant. Now, don't just think of it like a business contract. It's so much deeper. It's like a sacred vow, a binding promise, almost like a wedding ceremony that creates and defines a brand new relationship. So here's how they build this new nation. God brings the people to the foot of Mount Sinai. There he gives them the 10 Commandments, which are way more than just a list of rules. They're the actual blueprint for a whole new kind of society. The people agree to the terms, and the deal is sealed. God basically says, I'll be your God, and they say, we'll be your people. And just like that, a bunch of ex-slaves become a nation with a divine purpose. Now this brings us to the final and honestly the most mind-blowing part of the story. Okay, so they've been rescued. They're in a formal relationship with God. But the ultimate goal is something bigger. It's all about answering this question. How can a perfectly holy God literally come and live with imperfect people? Welcome to part three, from covenant to presence. But right after this amazing covenant is made, there's a disaster. While Moses is up on the mountain getting the details, the people down below completely break the agreement. They build a golden calf and start worshiping it. I mean, it seems like the whole thing is over before it even really started. But right in the middle of this failure, God provides an unexpected way forward, the tabernacle. And this is why the tabernacle is such a game changer. It's this incredible, sacred tent, a sort of mobile holy of holies, designed so God's glorious presence could be right there, in the very center of their camp. So the book of Exodus doesn't end with the people reaching the promised land. No, it ends with God reaching them. His glory fills the tabernacle. Mission accomplished. So God is now living with his people. Amazing. But why are we still talking about this story thousands of years later? Well, that brings us to our final section, the lasting legacy of Exodus. For Christians, a huge part of its legacy is how the whole story is seen as pointing forward to the story of Jesus. All these key moments get a new layer of meaning. The Passover lamb points to Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice. The crossing of the Red Sea becomes a picture of salvation from sin. And the tabernacle, that idea of God living with his people, finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus, who is even called Emmanuel, which means God with us. But even beyond that, Exodus gives us some really powerful things to think about. It shows a God who hears people when they're suffering and steps in, a God who frees people from all kinds of slavery. It also shows us that real freedom isn't a free-for-all. It comes with responsibility. And it's a constant warning about idolatry, about putting our trust in anything other than God. But when you boil it all down, the story is about one thing:
God wants a close relationship with his people.
So if you remember one thing, let it be this. Exodus isn't just a story about leaving Egypt. It's a story about God himself bringing his people into three huge realities: real freedom, a committed relationship, and, unbelievably, into his very own presence.
And that leaves us with a question to wrestle with. Because these themes of slavery and freedom, of oppression and rescue, they're not just ancient history. So the real question for us is, what does deliverance look like right here in our world today?